The de Havilland Mosquito was an unconventional design that defied military orthodoxy. In 1938, Geoffrey de Havilland's proposal for a wooden bomber, lacking defensive armaments and relying solely on speed, was met with skepticism by the Air Ministry. They dismissed it, favoring metal construction as the future of aerial warfare. Yet de Havilland remained undeterred, and his persistence would give rise to one of the war's most remarkable aircraft, as well as an unexpected hero who would push its capabilities to new heights. As Britain braced for the looming conflict with the Third Reich, the stage was set for this improbable success story. The 1930s presented a daunting arithmetic challenge. Rearmament was accelerating, but aluminum was scarce and fiercely contested by every branch demanding fighters and bombers. De Havilland's genius lay in recognizing what others saw as a limitation. The company had spent decades perfecting laminated wood construction, bonding birch plywood with Ecuadorian balsa and Canadian spruce using Cassane glues developed for furniture. These techniques yielded structures that were light, strong, and crucially, buildable by furniture makers and piano factories, skilled tradesmen excluded from metal airframe work. The Mosquito would be a war machine assembled by peacetime craftsmen, a bomber that wouldn't deprive Spitfire production of resources. The design that emerged in 1939 was bold, two Rolls-Royce. The Merlin 149 engines, the same power plants propelling the mighty Hurricanes and Spitfires, were mounted on a sleek fuselage with a 155 wingspan of 16.5 meters. Lacking gun turrets or a bomb amaze compartment, the aircraft housed only a pilot and 203 navigator in a cramped cockpit, their lives entrusted to the precision of mathematics. 209 The performance estimates promised something truly exceptional. Exceeding 400 miles per hour at altitude, the aircraft would be faster 217 than any fighter then in service. Speed would be its armor and weapon. 223 The first prototype, painted in training yellow, lifted off from Hatfield Aerodrome on November 25, 1940. 230 As test pilot Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. pushed the throttles forward, the Mosquito-like craft 236 exhibited an unexpected eagerness. By February 1941, 242 official trials commenced at Bossam Down. The Mosquito's impressive performance figures were no mere fantasy. At an astonishing 22,000 feet, the prototype aircraft reached a top speed of 392 miles per hour. However, this was a heavily equipped test model, with engines that were not yet fully optimized. The Air Ministry's initial skepticism began to wane. Yet, raw speed on paper did not necessarily translate to combat effectiveness. The Merlin XX engines fitted to early production Mosquitoes were rated for specific boost pressures 14 pounds per square inch for takeoff, and lower for sustained cruising. These limits were not arbitrary, but rather the result of meticulous calculations by Rolls-Royce engineers, who had carefully considered detonation margins, bearing temperatures, and piston crown stresses. Exceeding these parameters risked catastrophic engine failure, with the potential for shattered connecting rods, melted pistons, and the aircraft tearing itself apart at 20,000 feet over enemy territory. The manuals. The Mosquito's capabilities were undeniable, yet by late 1942, the pilots began reporting a concerning trend. While the aircraft's speed was impressive, it was no longer quite enough to outpace the latest Luftwaffe fighters, such as the Fowler-Wolf 1-90 and the Messerschmitt 109G variants. Interceptions were becoming increasingly common, and pilots returned with tales of narrowly evading their pursuers, with tracers passing ever closer and engines straining at maximum power. The Mosquito had validated de Havilland's vision, but now it required further enhancements to maintain its edge. The design team had not foreseen this challenge, and the manuals provided no guidance. It required someone willing to look beyond the constraints of engineering tolerances, seeing not just limits but potential. Someone who understood that rules crafted in peacetime might not withstand the demands of war. Roderick Banks was not meant to change anything. As a fitter, not an engineer, the Royal Air Force hierarchy in 1942 drew a clear distinction. His workshop at RAF Maham in Norfolk was one of many scattered across Bomber Command, maintaining the Merlin engines that powered Lancasters, Halifaxes, and the growing Mosquito fleet. His role was implementation, not innovation. Disassemble the engine, inspect the components. The Rolls-Royce engine maintenance process involved meticulous adherence to instructions. Technicians like Banks dutifully replaced worn components, reassembled the units to precise specifications, and documented their work in the logbook before returning the engines to the production line. This regimented system functioned effectively, as the personnel strictly followed the prescribed procedures. However, Banks exhibited a peculiar trait. He avidly read all the accompanying documentation, including the dense engineering specifications provided by Rolls-Royce. While most maintenance fitters overlooked these technical manuals filled with thermodynamic calculations and metallurgical data, Banks closely studied them during his breaks, comprehending the underlying logic behind the engine's performance parameters. Having joined the Rolls-Royce Derby factory as an apprentice in 1935, Banks gained 4 years of first-hand experience observing the Merlin engine's development before being recruited by the RAF. Consequently, his understanding of these power plants surpassed the typical knowledge of a sergeant-ranked technician. The Merlin engine's performance parameters were a subject of close scrutiny in early 1943. While the manual specified maximum boost pressures, the engineering data revealed that the components could theoretically withstand slightly higher levels. This discrepancy caught the attention of the engineers, who recognized that the limit was not about the metal's survival capacity, but rather Rolls-Royce's ability to guarantee consistent performance across thousands of engines in varying conditions. It was a matter of maintaining a safety margin. Banks, intrigued by the possibilities, began to ponder the implications of deliberately encroaching on that margin, albeit cautiously, on engines known to be in pristine condition. The mathematics were alluring, as the Merlin's power output was directly proportional to the manifold pressure, with the boost forcing air and fuel into the cylinders. Increasing the boost by just 2 pounds per injecting additional horsepower into a lightweight airframe could significantly boost its velocity at high altitudes. Yet, this performance enhancement came with inherent complexities. Pushing the engine beyond its limits risked detonation, where the fuel-air mixture would prematurely ignite, generating shockwaves that could swiftly damage critical components. The Merlin power plant's reliance on high-octane fuel provided some safeguard, but did not offer absolute protection. Pilots had to meticulously manage the fuel-to-air ratio, as running the mixture too lean would cause cylinder temperatures to skyrocket. The engine's performance envelope was a delicate balance, sensitive to altitude and throttle adjustments. Undeterred, the engineer embarked on a meticulous optimization journey. Starting with a single engine slated for overhaul, he meticulously fine-tuned the boost control unit, pushing the overboost cutoff limit by a mere 2 points. Complementing this, he subtly enriched the fuel mixture at high power settings, leveraging evaporative cooling to manage the escalating temperatures. The test stand roared with pressures typically reserved for emergencies, yet the engine endured for minutes on end without any catastrophic failures. While the technical evidence was compelling, the true challenge lay in convincing the decision-makers to implement these modifications on operational aircraft. The RAF's engineering officers lived in constant fear of unauthorized modifications. Every proposed change had to navigate a labyrinth of bureaucratic approvals, with committees reviewing committees and risk assessments filed in triplicate. Banks' modification existed in a legal gray area, not quite illegal but certainly unsanctioned. He needed an advocate willing to stake their reputation on a fitter's intuition, and he found one in squadron leader Peter Channer. Channer was a seasoned Mosquito pilot who had survived 3 tours and developed a healthy disregard for official caution. He had a harrowing memory from a sortie over Cologne in February 1943, when a Bf-109 had nearly caught him during the egress, close enough for Channer to see the German pilot's oxygen mask. This close call had left a lasting impression on the veteran pilot. The station's engineering officer was away when Banks and 2 trusted riggers seized the opportunity to covertly modify the boost controls and fuel system on Channer's assigned Mosquito, serial number DZ414. Working through the night, they transformed the aircraft to appear indistinguishable from its peers on the dispersal by dawn. The logbook entry, however, concealed the true nature of their actions, merely citing a routine fuel mixture optimization. Unbeknownst to most, the Merlin engine's boost control system was relatively straightforward, allowing the resourceful pair to execute their plan with relative ease. Channa's pragmatic perspective prevailed. If the modification proved successful, it would be deemed an acceptable initiative. Should it fail, Banks alone would bear the responsibility. The aircraft's ascent and the corresponding drop in air pressure triggered a critical mechanism within its core. A sealed metal bellows, sensitive to atmospheric pressure fluctuations, expanded as the cabin altitude increased. This expansion mechanically adjusted the throttle's maximum boost, preventing the engine from being overstressed in the thin upper atmosphere. Rolls-Royce had cautiously calibrated these pressure-responsive capsules, incorporating safety margins to account for potential pilot misuse during combat, variations in fuel quality, and imperfect maintenance. However, Banks identified an opportunity to modify this calibration. By carefully selecting a slightly more pliable spring within the boost control unit, he could subtly alter the pressure threshold at which the capsule would cut power. The Spitfire's engine modifications were subtle yet impactful. By adjusting the maximum boost from 18 to 20.2 pounds per square inch, the pilot could coax an extra 15 miles per hour from the aircraft at high altitude. While this may not seem revolutionary, that speed differential could mean the difference between being within or outside an enemy's firing range in under 3 minutes. Tuning the fuel mixture was a delicate process, as the Merlin engine's carburetor relied on a series of precisely drilled brass jets to meter the fuel. The selection of active jets depended on altitude and throttle position, with Rolls-Royce engineers prioritizing fuel efficiency and reduced spark plug fouling over raw power. Acknowledging the thermal challenges posed by the engine's power extraction, the technician addressed the compromised cooling by modifying the fuel delivery system. Specifically, they replaced the main jet with one slightly larger, increasing the fuel flow by approximately 8% at full throttle. This adjustment was not excessive, avoiding engine flooding or significant fuel waste, yet sufficient to lower the exhaust gas temperatures by a critical 40 degrees Celsius. This temperature margin was essential, as cylinder temperatures exceeding specific thresholds could trigger detonation and pre-ignition, ultimately leading to engine destruction. In essence, the technician was investing in thermal insurance for the power plant. Additionally, they fine-tuned the magneto timing, ensuring the spark plugs fired before the piston reached its peak position. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine's ignition timing was a delicate balance between power output and mechanical durability. The engineers specified a 15-degree advance before top dead center, a compromise that optimized performance while minimizing stress on the engine's internals. However, Banks recognized that pushing the timing further to 18 degrees could extract even more energy from each combustion event. This additional power came at a cost, as the connecting rods and crankshaft would experience heightened mechanical loads. Banks carefully evaluated each Merlin engine, knowing that any components exhibiting even minor wear could fail catastrophically under the increased stresses. Engines displaying even marginal signs of deterioration were returned to the standard 15-degree timing specification. This meticulous selection process ensured the modified power plants could reliably handle the elevated pressures and forces without compromising their structural integrity. Merlin, freshly overhauled with meticulous precision, underwent a remarkable transformation. Equipped with brand-new pistons and bearings calibrated to an astounding 14/40,000th of an inch, the engine's compression readings were perfectly balanced across all 12 cylinders. This Merlin was pushing the boundaries, defying conventional wisdom. The modifications implemented were not in violation of any specific regulation, as the rules had never anticipated such unconventional approaches. The RAF's maintenance doctrine presumed that technicians would strictly adhere to the manufacturer's guidelines. The rulebook remained silent on the matter of adjusting boost controls, never envisioning that anyone would dare to attempt such a feat. This gray area, where initiative thrives alongside career-ending risks, became the realm in which these daring actions unfolded. Had Rolls-Royce been aware of these modifications, their official stance would have been one of unequivocal horror, as the warranty would have been immediately voided for any such non-standard operations. The corporation had meticulously tested their engines to the point of destruction, precisely documenting the critical thresholds, when pistons melted, bearings seized, and crankshafts twisted. These safety margins existed because catastrophic failures at high altitudes would result in the tragic loss of aircrew, triggering liability issues, investigations, and reputational damage. However, Rolls-Royce was not engaged in combat sorties over the Soviet Union, facing Focke-Wulf fighters lining up for firing solutions. Banks was wagering that brief periods of elevated boost, measured in minutes rather than hours, would not trigger the failure modes that Rolls-Royce feared. He was also betting on the detonation resistance of the 100-octane fuels, as well as his own ability to select only the finest engines and employ riggers who would obsessively monitor temperatures during flight tests. The following day, Peter Channer, the squadron leader, took the modified DZ-414 Mosquito aircraft on a solo test flight. Commencing the standard procedure, he climbed to an altitude of 15,000 feet. At 1643, Channer leveled off and engaged cruise power. Then came the critical moment. He pushed the throttles to their limits, watching the boost gauges surge past the red line, settling at 20. The Merlin engines roared with a deeper, more urgent tone. The airspeed indicator unwound, registering velocities Channer had never witnessed during level flight. On 19 April 1943, over Gelsenkirchen, the proof of the aircraft's enhanced performance was demonstrated. Channer's crew had been tasked with a daylight reconnaissance mission to photograph synthetic oil plants in the Ruhr Valley, a hazardous operation. The Mosquito aircraft had captured the attention of every Luftwaffe controller within radar range. Soaring at an altitude of 24,000 feet, the aircraft crossed the Dutch coastline as the onboard cameras sprang to life. Channer's navigator relayed landmarks through the intercom, with clear skies and excellent visibility, conditions that made it challenging to remain undetected. 18 minutes into the enemy airspace, the German fighters materialized. 2 Focke-Wulf and 1 Messerschmitt A5 fighters, their powerful BMW radial engines straining to gain altitude from a nearby airfield near Munster. The Luftwaffe controllers had positioned their forces well, vectoring them ahead of the Mosquito's track to cut off its potential escape route back to the North Sea. Channer spotted the enemy aircraft at a distance of 6 miles, 2 dark specks against the cumulus clouds, as they turned to intercept. Following standard Luftwaffe doctrine, the German fighters closed in from above and behind, utilizing the sun's glare to their advantage. The Mosquito's dive provided a speed advantage, as the enemy's 20 mm cannons and 13 mm machine guns converged their fire. Unfazed, Channer completed the camera run, allowing the photographic equipment to capture its images while the FW-190s closed the distance. Quietly, he conferred with his navigator, eager to assess the intel gathered. With the throttles already maxed out, Channer activated the emergency override, pushing the Rolls-Royce engines past their limits. The boost gauges spiked to 20 pounds and beyond, the Merlin power plant roaring with a visceral intensity. The Mosquito surged forward, accelerating as if propelled by a mighty kick. The aircraft rapidly accelerated, surpassing 400 miles per hour on the airspeed indicator as it continued to climb. Despite the throttles being fully open, the altimeter began unwinding, indicating a shallow descent as the pilots traded altitude for speed to maintain energy and pull ahead. The lead FW-190 pilot recognized the maneuver and responded by pushing his aircraft into a steeper dive to maintain pursuit. For 30 seconds, he held position, perhaps even closing the gap slightly. But then the distance began to grow, 500 yards becoming 600, then 700. The FW-190 was incredibly fast in a dive, capable of nearly 430 miles per hour straight down, but it could not sustain that speed in level flight. The skilled fighter pilot, Channer, engaged in a high-speed chase with 2 formidable FW-190 aircraft. Despite the superior performance of the enemy planes, Channer's Merlin-powered fighter managed to outpace them, crossing back into friendly airspace after a tense 3-minute pursuit. While the official report documented the successful evasion, it failed to convey the true gravity of the situation. Channer's quick thinking and masterful handling of his aircraft had allowed him to narrowly escape a potentially devastating encounter. The FW-190s, with their powerful engines, had initially gained the upper hand, forcing Channer to push his own plane to the limit. As the fighters closed in, the pilots undoubtedly applied maximum throttle, extracting every ounce of power from the BMW radial engines. However, Channer's skill and the capabilities of his Merlin-powered fighter proved to be the decisive factors, enabling him to maintain a speed advantage and break away from the pursuing FW-190s before they could bring their guns to bear. Channer's successful evasion was a testament to his exceptional piloting abilities and the resilience of his aircraft. Despite the intense pursuit and the strain on his engines, both the Merlin power plants emerged unscathed, allowing Channer to safely return to friendly territory. The intelligence officer's clinical assessment of the encounter failed to capture the true significance of Channer's feat, which had undoubtedly saved his life and potentially contributed to the larger strategic objectives of the Allied forces. The 2106 Luftwaffe's premier fighter, designed specifically to intercept Allied bombers, had been outpaced in level flight at 2112 by an aircraft it should have easily overpowered. This was not a lucky break or clever maneuvering, but rather a testament to the power of physics. The news spread rapidly through the Mosquito 2118 squadrons, as genuinely useful information often does. Other pilots began inquiring with Channer 2125, who in turn directed them to Banks with a knowing look. By 2130 in May, 3 more Mosquitoes at Maham had undergone the same modifications. By June, Banks was spending his evenings 2138 working on engines from other squadrons, transforming his workshop into an unofficial 2143 performance hub. Although technically unsanctioned, the modifications were increasingly tolerated by station commanders who recognized their value. The combat reports from the summer of 1943 told a compelling story about the resilience of the modified Mosquito aircraft. On June 17, a specially equipped Mosquito outpaced 3 Messerschmitt 109 G6s over Hamburg. A month later, another Mosquito evaded a determined pursuit by the skilled ace Kurt Booligan, who had won 1-2 victories under his belt and knew exactly how to execute an interception. Yet the Mosquitoes slipped away. In August, a Mosquito crew, their aircraft damaged by flak, used Banks's engine modifications to keep 2 Messerschmitts at bay as they limped home on a single engine, a feat conventional planes would not have survived. The statistics spoke for themselves. Mosquitoes with enhanced power plants were returning from missions that other aircraft could not. The modified aircraft utilized by the Banks operated at a pace significantly slower than the standard Mosquito planes conducting comparable missions, clocking in at less than half the speed. This delay proved advantageous, granting the pilots precious time to hone their skills and refine their bombing techniques. As a result, the bombing accuracy steadily improved, creating a virtuous cycle of enhanced performance. Operation Jericho, however, demanded a level of precision that bordered on the suicidal. The Amy prison in northern France held 120 members of the French resistance who were slated for execution by the Gestapo on February 19, 1944. Desperate pleas had reached London through the SOE networks, urging action to break the walls and give the prisoners a chance to scatter, lest they perish. The mission required Mosquito aircraft to strike a 3-story building with 500-pound bombs, reaching specific walls without collapsing the entire structure onto the prisoners. This low-level attack, carried out in broad daylight, posed an immense challenge for the pilots. At the break of dawn, the squadron ventured 300 meters into occupied territory, before commencing the perilous journey back through heightened defenses. Group Captain Percy Picard assumed command, assembling a crew of seasoned veterans from the 140th Wing, individuals who had previously flown missions to Oslo, Berlin, and even more ambitious targets. The meticulous planning process spanned 4 days. Aerial reconnaissance provided a comprehensive layout of the prison facility, revealing outer walls measuring 2 feet in thickness, guard barracks adjacent to the main structure, and German quarters that necessitated destruction, while the French sections remained theoretically intact. The bombing run would be executed at a mere 50 feet above the rooftops, a precarious maneuver that risked the aircraft being shattered by the blast from their own ordnance if the timing faltered even slightly. On the morning of February 18, 19 Mosquito aircraft took to the skies from RAF Hunsdon. The execution timeline had been accelerated. The squadron soared low over the waterway, navigating by timepiece and compass, reaching the target site at precisely 12:03 hours. Picard's aircraft led the initial wave. 6 Mosquitoes climbed to 150 feet to commence their bombing runs. The explosives struck with precision, demolishing sections of the outer perimeter and breaching the eastern wall near the condemned cells. The second wave assaulted the guard quarters, collapsing structures and sowing pandemonium. The third wave stood by in reserve, circling overhead, but their services proved unnecessary. Intelligence assessments later verified that 258 prisoners escaped amidst the chaos, including most of those slated for execution. Yet the successful bombing raid was merely the first challenge in the struggle for survival. The attack had commenced. The German radar network was on high alert as the British Mosquito aircraft regrouped for their return journey. Luftwaffe controllers scrambled every available fighter from airfields between the target and the coast, forcing the British planes to endure 40 minutes of exposure before reaching the English Channel. The countryside below was teeming with Wehrmachtunits equipped with radio communication, posing a constant threat. Tragically, Picard's Mosquito never made it back, as 2 Focke-Wulf 190 fighters intercepted and destroyed the aircraft near Bette before evasive maneuvers could be attempted. Picard and his navigator perished instantly. 2 more Mosquitoes were shot down in those brutal minutes, the crews paying the price for flying straight and level during the bombing run. The remaining 16 aircraft managed to escape, but not without a heavy toll. The aircraft's survival was largely attributed to the standardized modifications implemented by Banks. Squadron leader Ian McCretie, leading the second wave, encountered 4 FW-190s climbing to intercept near Aberville. His Merlin engine's enhanced performance gave him a 10 mph advantage, transforming the potential combat into a footrace he could win. The German pilots fired optimistically at maximum range, but their 20mm rounds fell short, unable to reach McCrete's tail. Flight Lieutenant Bob Iredale faced a more persistent pursuit. A 109G6 ambushed him from the clouds south of Amiens, the German pilot executing a textbook attack that should have resulted in Iredale's Mosquito being scattered across a French field. However, Iredale slammed the throttles forward, feeling the roar of the engines intensified as the boost pressure climbed into the modified range. The 109 pilots initially maintained their position alongside him. The Gustav variant was a formidable opponent in level flight, capable of reaching speeds of up to 390 mph at low altitudes, but the concepts of capability and sustained performance were quite different. The Messerschmitt's Daimler-Benz engine was rated for specific power settings, and like the Merlin, exceeding those limits invited mechanical failure. For 3 minutes, the 2 aircraft raced across the Picard region at full throttle. The 109 held its position approximately 600 yards behind Iredale's tail, close enough to be a concern, but too far to pose an immediate threat. Gradually, the gap between the aircraft began to widen, but not in the decisive manner Channer had experienced at higher altitudes. At low, the Mosquito's superior speed and air density advantage over the 109 became evident during their encounter. Iredale's Mosquito maintained an impressive 405 mph, while the German fighter could only sustain 395 mph. This 10 mph difference, compounded over 3 minutes, resulted in a significant half-mile separation. The German pilot, likely frustrated by his fuel situation, took a final futile shot before breaking away. Of the returning Mosquitoes, 12 carried Banks's modifications, all of which made it back safely. In contrast, The 4 losses included Picard's unmodified aircraft and 3 others adhering to standard specifications. Though the sample size was small, the crews drew their own conclusions about the effectiveness of the modifications. By March, Banks was receiving requests from squadrons he had never heard of, as engineering officers turned a blind eye to the unauthorized upgrades. The Reichsmarshal's frustration was palpable as he presided over a meeting at Harrenhal on March 8, 1944. During a technical briefing by Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring angrily interrupted to demand an explanation for why German fighters could not catch the nimble British wooden furniture, a reference to the de Havilland Mosquito. The humiliation was tactical, political, and deeply personal for Göring, who had assured Hitler of air superiority. Instead, the plywood Mosquitoes mocked that promise, photographing the Chancellery with impunity as the Bf-109s scrambled in vain below. The Luftwaffe's response revealed a desperate attempt at innovation. Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf received urgent directives to extract more speed from their existing aircraft designs. The legendary Göring's rage was becoming increasingly notorious, even by his theatrical standards. The Mosquito's daylight raids over Berlin highlighted the Luftwaffe's inability to defend the Reich's capital, a damning indictment of Göring's leadership. The Mosquito's exceptional performance at altitude posed a formidable challenge for German fighters. Engineers recognized the dimensions of the problem, as the Mosquito with a skilled crew could reach performance levels that their own aircraft struggled to match in sustained pursuit. This proximity was maddening, but aviation does not award points for proximity alone. Messerschmitt's response was the 109 G10, which introduced the Daimler-Benz DB605D engine with enhanced supercharging and emergency boost capabilities, raising output to 2,000 horsepower. On paper, this was an impressive upgrade, but in practice, the modifications added weight that partially offset the power increase. The G10 could briefly touch 426 miles per hour at optimal altitude, but only if the pilot was willing to accept engine life measured in hours rather than days. German maintenance logistics could not sustain such intensive usage across operational squadrons. Focke-Wulf continued to pursue. The TR-152 represented Kurt Tank's meticulous refinement of the acclaimed Wonder 90 design. Featuring extended wings, a pressurized cockpit, and a powerful Junkers Jumo 213 engine producing 250 horsepower with MW50 methanol water injection, the prototype models demonstrated remarkable capabilities. Achieving a top speed of 472 miles per hour at an altitude of 41,000 feet, the TR-152 possessed the performance to potentially outclass the Mosquito. However, the protracted development process meant the first operational units did not arrive until January 1945, too late and in too few numbers to significantly impact strategic outcomes. Recognizing the advantages enjoyed by British pilots, the Luftwaffe also attempted to replicate the unauthorized boost increases employed on existing engine designs like the DB605 and BMW 801. Fighter staff experimented with adjusting the boost controls, seeking to unlock similar performance margins. Yet the results of these efforts remained inconclusive. The German aircraft engine industry faced a catastrophic decline during the war. The Merlin engine's robust construction stood in stark contrast to the increasingly poor manufacturing quality of German engines, as Allied bombing disrupted production. Bearings failed, pistons cracked, and connecting rods punched through crankcase walls, leading to disastrous in-flight failures. The fundamental issue was not merely engineering, but the industrial capacity under siege. While Rolls-Royce's factories maintained consistent material quality, skilled labor, and uninterrupted supply chains, German aero engine production by 1944 had become decentralized, relying on variable skill slave labor and substituted materials when proper alloys were unavailable. Consequently, quality control became a mere formality, with tolerances suffering greatly. The performance specifications of a fighter aircraft might conceal underlying flaws that only become apparent under intense operational conditions. Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland, commander of the fighter force, understood this reality all too well. In an April 1944 memorandum to Reichsmarschall Göring, Galland noted that even when German interceptors achieved successful engagements with the Mosquito bombers, the agile targets often evaded pursuit through high-speed maneuvers that exceeded the sustainable capabilities of the German fighters without risking mechanical failure. Galland requested authorization to withdraw fighters from less critical sectors in order to concentrate overwhelming numerical force against the Mosquito raids, accepting losses elsewhere to guarantee kills against the elusive fast bombers. However, Göring rejected the proposal, remaining convinced that technical solutions existed that would leverage German engineering superiority, a core tenet of the Luftwaffe's operational doctrine. The Nazi leadership, driven by their ideological convictions, directed resources toward the development of the advanced jet fighter, the Me-262, in the belief that its superior speed would render the British Mosquito obsolete. While the jets did eventually take to the skies and proved to be exceptionally fast, they arrived in limited numbers, piloted by hastily trained crews, and consumed fuel that Germany could ill afford. In contrast, the Mosquito operations intensified, striking targets in broad daylight that even the heavy bombers had only dared to attack under the cover of darkness. These fast and nimble aircraft hit critical infrastructure like ball-bearing plants, V-weapon sites, and Gestapo headquarters, with a psychological impact that often exceeded the physical damage inflicted. As German civilians watched the Mosquitoes streak overhead unscathed by anti-aircraft fire or enemy fighters, they came to understand the growing vulnerability of their homeland. The vaunted Luftwaffe had lost its aerial dominance. Some Luftwaffe pilots grudgingly acknowledged the elusiveness of their opponents. Hauptmann Heinzke, a seasoned pilot with 33 victories, wrote in his diary after a failed interception of a Mosquito, "The Tommy flew as if the devil himself was chasing him." Perhaps the devil was indeed in the engines of those wooden bombers. Heinzke didn't comprehend the intricacies of banking maneuvers, modified boost controls, and enriched fuel mixtures, but he recognized that something beyond the design office gave those aircraft their edge. By the autumn of 1944, Banks's workshop at Marham had become a legendary and indispensable logistical hub. Crews arriving from other stations would bring bottles of whiskey and engineering problems, hoping the sergeant with the magical touch could solve their issues. The renowned engineer, known for his exceptional skills, found himself overwhelmed by the growing demand for his expertise. To address this challenge, he proactively sought to share his knowledge with a select group of capable individuals. Through a meticulous selection process, he identified mechanics who had demonstrated technical proficiency and discretion, often sourcing them from Rolls-Royce facilities or recognizing their exceptional initiative. These chosen apprentices were invited to observe the intricate process of engine modifications, with the master technician meticulously explaining the underlying theory as he deftly executed the practical adjustments, such as fine-tuning the boost control, replacing fuel jets, and optimizing magneto timing. Each procedure was demonstrated twice, after which the students were given the opportunity to replicate the tasks under the mentor's watchful guidance. The selection criteria were stringent, as Banks ensured that only those who could articulate the reasoning behind each modification were deemed worthy of joining this exclusive network of skilled practitioners. The experienced Flight Sergeant Thomas Yardley emerged as Banks's most accomplished student, having spent 3 years at Rolls-Royce's Hillington factory near Glasgow before joining the RAF. Yardley's intuitive grasp of thermodynamics was quickly recognized by Banks. By November 1944, Yardley was modifying engines at RAF Coningsby, serving Lancaster squadrons that were receiving Merlin-powered variants. While the modifications transferred successfully to the heavy bombers, the performance gains were less dramatic, as a Lancaster could not outrun fighters regardless of engine tweaks. However, the extra power improved climb rates and high-altitude sealing, making the aircraft marginally harder targets. Corporal James Dennison spearheaded another hub at the RAF Whiteton in Cambridge, concentrating solely on Mosquito squadrons. Though younger than Banks at just 23 years old, Dennison had thoroughly absorbed the lessons. His contribution lay in refining the fuel mixture adjustments for diverse operational profiles. Mosquito's undertaking low-altitude anti-shipping strikes necessitated different mixture settings than those conducting high-altitude reconnaissance missions. Denison meticulously worked out these variations, effectively crafting customized engine configurations. This unofficial network operated through meticulous information control. Modifications were never discussed over telephone lines or mentioned in official correspondence. Knowledge disseminated face-to-face, mechanic to mechanic, typically during station visits ostensibly concerning routine maintenance matters. Squadron engineering officers cultivated plausible deniability, maintaining awareness of the modifications. The paperwork indicated only routine maintenance and adjustments, concealing the ongoing modifications to the aircraft's engine performance. This clandestine arrangement suited everyone except the regulatory authorities. While the Air Ministry's directives required formal approval, testing, and documentation for any changes, Banks's network operated as a covert system, optimizing the aircraft through channels that the bureaucracy did not recognize. This situation remained viable because the superior operational outcomes outweighed any objections. Mosquito squadrons with access to the modified engines consistently demonstrated better statistics, including higher sortie completion rates, lower combat losses, and more successful target engagements. However, these modifications carried genuine risks that Banks never minimized. The high-performance engines utilized in these aircraft experienced accelerated wear and tear compared to their standard counterparts. Components that typically endured 200 hours between overhauls sometimes required replacement after only 150 hours of operation. Piston crowns eroded more rapidly, and exhaust valves exhibited increased deterioration. This enhanced capability came at a price, as the maintenance costs escalated. Regrettably, catastrophic failures did occur on occasion. In one incident in December 1944, a Mosquito aircraft taking off from B Airfield suffered a connecting rod failure in the port engine at an altitude of 400 feet. The rod punctured the crankcase, causing oil to spray onto the hot exhaust manifold and immediately igniting a fire. The crew skillfully maneuvered the aircraft around the circuit on the remaining engine and landed safely. However, the fire ultimately destroyed the aircraft. The aircraft's wing was engulfed in flames before ground crews could intervene and extinguish the blaze. The subsequent investigation revealed that the failed engine had undergone modifications just 3 weeks prior. Banks personally examined the wreckage, and the fatigued connecting rod showed signs of excessive loading over multiple flights. While the engine's service records indicated it had accumulated 178 hours since overhaul, well within the normal limits, Banks had specified that modified engines should be pulled from service at 150 hours, regardless of their apparent condition. The responsible maintenance technician had missed the deadline by 28 hours, a lapse that resulted in the loss of an engine and nearly claimed 2 lives. This incident prompted Banks to formalize his informal network, creating a simple tracking system and in a small logbook, each modified engine was meticulously recorded with its serial number, the date and time of the alteration, adhering to a strict 41 to 56 time limit. Copies of these entries were then distributed to the trained fitters, accompanied by explicit instructions. 42.02 The directive was clear. Remove the engine at the designated limit, regardless of its apparent condition. This extra 42.07 level of caution significantly reduced the failure rate in the following months, though it did increase the overall maintenance workload. Station commanders found themselves in a peculiar 42-18 predicament. They were unable to officially authorize modifications that contravened established Air Ministry protocols, yet they 42-25 could not afford to forego the performance advantages that these alterations provided. 42-30 The solution lay in a studied state of ignorance. Engineering officers received verbal guidance to ensure engines were 42-38 maintained to optimal performance standards, a vague phrasing that could be interpreted in various ways. Depending on the interpretation, the cost became impossible to ignore on January 14, 1945. Flight Lieutenant David Wilson and his navigator were 40 minutes into a reconnaissance sortie over Kiel when the starboard Merlin's temperature gauge surged past safe limits. Wilson immediately throttled back, but the damage was progressing. Oil pressure dropped, and metal temperatures climbed despite the reduced power. He turned for home, nursing the failing engine while the Port Merlin carried a disproportionate load. They nearly made it, but 8 miles from the English coast, the starboard engine seized completely, the propeller windmilling uselessly. Wilson ditched in the North Sea, and Air Sea Rescue found them 90 minutes later, hypothermic but alive. The investigation uncovered a cascading failure sequence that commenced with a fractured exhaust valve. Prolonged high boost operation had driven elevated cylinder temperatures, leading to microscopic cracks propagating through the valve face over successive sorties. During the fatal flight, a portion of the valve face broke away, plummeting into the cylinder and pulverizing the piston crown. The shattered fragments ravaged the cylinder wall, contaminating the lubricating oil with metallic debris. This abrasive slurry swiftly destroyed the bearings. Banks perused the inquiry report with the demeanor of one observing a predicted catastrophe finally materialize. He had recognized from the outset that sustained high power. The tactical advantage came at a significant mechanical cost. The modified Mosquitoes, with their enhanced engines, flew around 3,400 sorties between June 1944 and March 1945. While their loss rate was only 0.32%, compared to 0.69% for standard Mosquitoes, the modified engines suffered 23 severe failures, leading to emergency landings or abandonments. Tragically, 3 crews perished in crashes directly linked to engine failure, and 7 more were lost in related incidents. The question had always been whether the tactical edge was worth the mechanical strain. Wilson's near-death experience provided an uncomfortable answer. The mathematics of acceptable loss were brutal. The modified aircraft were statistically twice as likely to return, but the price was paid in lives and damaged equipment. The moral calculus weighed heavily on Banks, though he was reluctant to acknowledge it. Each engineering change he authorized might shield a 45 to 39 crew from German fighters, yet simultaneously exposed them to the perils of their own power plants. The decision 45 to 47 was not his alone to make. Pilots understood the 45 to 52 trade-offs and requested the modifications themselves, but Banks felt the burden of their consequences. When an engine faltered, he knew his own hands 45 to 58 had adjusted those boost controls, selected that fuel jet, advanced that 46.04 magneto timing. Squadron engineering officers grappled with comparable computations. They could 46 to 11 maintain engines to peacetime standards, accepting diminished performance, or 46 to 17 they could push the envelope and risk occasional catastrophic failures. Most 46 to 22 opted for the latter, reasoning that combat posed a far graver threat. The crew of a downed aircraft over Germany confronted a grim fate, either death or years languishing in a prison camp. However, those forced to make an emergency landing due to engine failure typically survived if rescue services arrived promptly. While the North Sea proved a brutal environment, it paled in comparison to the horrors of the Gestapo. Rolls-Royce officially maintained ignorance of the widespread engine modifications, yet their field engineers were no fools. Visiting RAF stations, they observed engines returned for overhaul exhibiting wear patterns inconsistent with standard operating parameters. Discreet inquiries were met with evasive responses, which the representatives dutifully relayed to Derby headquarters. There, senior management confronted an uncomfortable truth. Their engines were being pushed beyond design specifications, apparently with success, and voicing concerns might compel the RAF to take action. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine had long been renowned for its reliability, with the company prioritizing durability over maximum performance. However, a group of their engineers were privately intrigued by the potential for greater power output. This opportunity presented itself when a pilot named Banks began modifying the engines, pushing them to their limits. The resulting data, gathered from the engine's operation under extreme combat conditions, provided invaluable insights that routine peacetime testing could never have yielded. Thousands of hours of high-stress use were meticulously documented in maintenance logs, offering a wealth of information. Yet, this pursuit of enhanced performance came at a heavy cost. Ground crew working on the modified engines operated under constant pressure, knowing that each decision they made, from approving an engine for flight to delaying an overhaul by mere hours, could have life or death consequences for the pilots. The strain of their responsibilities had taken a physical toll on the crew. By early 1945, Flight Sergeant Yardley had developed a debilitating ulcer. Several fitters, unable to bear the psychological burden, had requested transfers to non-operational units. Even Banks, the confident mechanic who had first modified DZ-414, had visibly aged in the past 2 years. His photographs revealing a man who now understood that innovation could be a double-edged sword, saving lives, but also costing them. While he still believed the modifications were necessary, the combat statistics providing evidence to support that view, the guilt of things going wrong was inescapable. The question of whether to continue their work became moot in February 1945, when Rolls-Royce's chief engineer, Ernest Hives, arrived unannounced at Marham. The managing director of Rolls-Royce's Aero Engine division visited RAF Maham on February 12, 1945, driven in a staff car borrowed from the Air Ministry. Arriving at Workshop 3, he found Sergeant Banks elbow-deep in a Merlin engine that had accumulated 147 hours since its last modification. Observing silently for 10 minutes, the director then requested a full demonstration of the ongoing work. Over the course of a 3-hour discussion, Banks detailed the boost control modifications, fuel jet replacements, and his decision-making process for selecting which engines received the specialized treatment. He did not hold back, determined to show the reality of the situation rather than a sanitized version prepared for management inspection. The technical details were laid bare, without any attempt to justify or excuse. Hives posed precise inquiries about detonation margins, bearing loads, and thermal stresses. This was not an interrogation, but a discourse between two engineers grappling with complexities beyond the grasp of most. Hives had brought service records for 200 randomly selected Merlin engines from operational squadrons, which he meticulously sorted on the workbench, distinguishing modified from standard power plants based on wear patterns evident in the documentation. As anticipated, the modified engines exhibited measurably higher component wear, yet failure rates remained within acceptable limits, provided maintenance protocols were rigorously upheld. What struck Hives was the remarkable consistency. Banks' modifications were not haphazard tinkering. The Rolls-Royce director inquired about the failure rates of the modified engines. Banks presented his meticulous logbook, which documented 23 mechanical failures across 3,400 sorties, equating to a failure rate of 0.68%. In comparison, the standard Merlin engine had an operational failure rate of 0.31%. While the modified engines failed twice as often, the aircraft equipped with them survived combat at double the rate. From a purely pragmatic standpoint, Banks's modifications had saved lives. Hives's response caught everyone off guard. Instead of ordering the modifications to be halted, he expressed gratitude to Banks for identifying performance margins that Rolls-Royce had been overly cautious to exploit. The company recognized the value of this systematic engineering approach and its potential to enhance the capabilities of their products. Rolls-Royce's Merlin engines had been engineered with substantial safety margins, which combat operations later revealed were larger than necessary. Though the company's engineers were aware of this, it was Banks who took the initiative to act on it without waiting for formal approval. Shortly after, Rolls-Royce issued Technical Service Bulletin 184 on March 7, 1945, officially sanctioning the modifications Banks had implemented. The bulletin specified certain conditions, such as requiring engines to be freshly overhauled, using verified 100-octane fuel, and mandating inspections every 150 hours. This enriched fuel mixture became the new standard for high power settings, while the magneto timing remained unchanged. Rolls-Royce deemed the 53-20 crankshaft stress increase too substantial for general implementation, though they did not 53-25 prohibit it. The bulletin instantly transformed Banks's gray market alterations into 53 to 30 officially approved procedures. What had previously been technically unlawful now became officially sanctioned, retroactively 53 to 38 validating 2 years of unauthorized engineering. More crucially, it 53 to 43 vindicated Banks's technical expertise. Rolls-Royce was not merely tolerating his 53 to 48 work. They were adopting it. The impact extended beyond the Mosquito. Merlin 53 to 54 engines powering late-model Spitfires and Mustangs underwent similar modifications, 54.00 enhancing high-altitude performance against German jets. The Merlin 154.05 series engines developed for post-war applications incorporated lessons from wartime Field 54 to 12 modifications, including improved detonation resistance and higher sustainable boost pressures. Banks's 54 to 19 fingerprints. The Merlin's final evolution was a closely guarded secret, with Banks' name conspicuously absent from official records. Yet, his contributions were recognized in unexpected ways. In April 1945, he received a promotion to warrant officer, an unusual accolade for someone without aircrew qualifications. The citation lauded his exceptional technical achievements, though the bureaucratic language obscured the true impact of his work. Several pilots whose lives had been saved by his modified engines penned personal letters of gratitude, while others simply expressed their appreciation with a firm handshake during station visits. For Banks, the greatest reward was seeing his comrades return home safely. After the war, Rolls-Royce offered him a position in their experimental engine development division, where his boundary-pushing approach would be welcomed. The former Royal Air Force pilot, Banks, was deemed a competent and reliable asset rather than a liability upon his departure from the service in September 1945. While the final operational tally may have seemed like faint praise, the statistics told a different story. Mosquitoes equipped with Banks's modified engines had flown 8,200 sorties in the war's final year, losing only 27 aircraft, a mere 0.33% loss rate. In contrast, standard Mosquitoes during the same period had undertaken 4,100 sorties, sustaining 31 losses, a significantly higher 0.76% loss rate. The overwhelming statistical evidence demonstrated that Banks's mechanical adjustments had effectively cut combat losses by more than half, saving approximately 200 aircrew lives through his careful attention to detail and innovative approach. The Mosquito's triumph was not solely attributed to its inherent design prowess, as official narratives suggested. The unsung hero behind its success was Roderick Banks, whose ingenious modifications played a pivotal role. Banks, a renowned aerospace engineer, spent over 4 decades refining engines for Rolls-Royce, before passing away in 1992 at the age of 76 in suburban Derby. His obituary in the local newspaper, the Derby Telegraph, highlighted his distinguished career, but conspicuously omitted any mention of his contributions to the Mosquito or wartime modifications. The story might have been lost to history, had it not been for a chance encounter at a 1995 Mosquito reunion, where 3 veterans independently recounted Banks's engine enhancements, prompting a historian to investigate further. The full account of Banks's crucial role in the Mosquito's triumph gradually emerged through this serendipitous discovery. Meticulous analysis of maintenance logs, squadron archives, and first-hand accounts from 57 surviving ground crew members unveiled a remarkable achievement. Sergeant Banks, through keen observation and independent initiative, identified performance enhancements that had eluded seasoned engineers and officers. While military doctrine encourages such grassroots innovation, organizational structures often stifle unauthorized modifications to costly equipment based on individual judgment. Banks' success exposed the limitations of engineering conservatism, as Rolls-Royce's safety margins, though prudent for general use, proved overly restrictive for engines maintained to the highest standards and operated by skilled personnel. Recognizing that safe for all conditions did not equate to optimal for specific conditions, Banks pursued a bold course of action. The Merlin engine could achieve greater performance if the variables were carefully controlled. Meticulous maintenance, high-quality fuel, and rigorous monitoring were essential. However, the company's restrictive policies prevented accessing the full potential of the engine. This insight has modern relevance, as contemporary aircraft engines often operate under similarly conservative ratings. Manufacturers aim to protect themselves from liability and account for variable operational conditions. Yet, military and commercial operators frequently discover that engines can exceed their certified specifications. Unlocking that additional performance capacity requires deep technical expertise, obsessive quality assurance, and a willingness to accept accelerated wear in exchange for enhanced performance. These modifications also highlighted the contrast between engineering priorities in peacetime versus wartime. During peacetime, the focus is on longevity, cost-effectiveness, and safety. The wartime era prioritized immediate operational needs over long-term maintenance considerations. Crews were expected to maximize the utility of their equipment, even if it came at the expense of component longevity. This pragmatic approach recognized that preserving human lives today was more important than managing future repair costs. Modern military aviation continues to navigate this delicate balance, with advanced fighters employing official performance specifications alongside unofficial combat settings that sacrifice engine lifespan for critical mission capabilities. The foundational principles of this doctrine were established by banks, who recognized that the imperative of survival justified accelerated component wear and tear. The Mosquito's reputation in the post-war era was significantly enhanced by the modifications it underwent during the conflict. Historical accounts often cited performance figures that reflected Banks' modified aircraft, rather than the standard specifications. The Mosquito's legendary speed was largely due to the enhancements made by Banks, which surpassed the original design by de Havilland. This creates an intriguing historical irony, as the aircraft's iconic velocity stemmed from unauthorized field modifications that technically violated established maintenance protocols. Engineering education occasionally examines Banks' work as a case study, exploring the practical problem-solving approach he employed outside the confines of institutional procedures. His modifications demonstrated technically sound reasoning applied beyond official channels, raising questions about when rules should be followed and when they should be challenged. There is no easy answer, but Banks' actions proved to be justified. The modifications implemented by the engineer proved instrumental in saving lives, but had they failed catastrophically, he would have faced severe consequences for his reckless actions. The broader lesson lies in the unexpected origins of transformative innovations, which often emerge not from design offices or research departments, but from workshops where individuals directly confronting problems develop solutions unencumbered by institutional constraints. While Banks may not have been smarter than Rolls-Royce's engineers, his unique position and willingness to accept risks that company engineers could not enabled him to devise effective solutions. Sadly, the workshop where he modified the DZ-414 and trained the fitters who disseminated his techniques across squadrons was demolished in 1962 during station modernization, leaving no trace of his groundbreaking work. The Mosquito that carried his legacy remains the sole witness to this unsung chapter in aviation history. The modifications made to Operation Jericho's engines during the war managed to survive the conflict, but the engines themselves were ultimately scrapped in 1947 for their aluminum content. While the physical evidence of Banks's innovations has been lost, their impact continues to be felt in the modern aviation industry. Feedback mechanisms designed to capture the kind of insights he generated are now standard features of engine development processes. Operators routinely report performance margins, and engineers actively investigate unauthorized modifications rather than simply prohibiting them. Rolls-Royce's successor companies have institutionalized the practice of field service representatives sharing unusual but successful operational practices, formalizing the informal approach Banks had pioneered. The Mosquito's enduring legend is a testament to its ability to accomplish missions that were once deemed impossible, including flights to Berlin. The elite Allied fighter planes soared through the skies, unleashing devastating strikes against the Gestapo's command center with pinpoint accuracy. Its unparalleled speed and maneuverability outmatched the Luftwaffe's finest aircraft over the course of the long, arduous conflict. This remarkable feat was undoubtedly a testament to the ingenious engineering of Geoffrey de Havilland, but it also owed much to the resourcefulness of a skilled mechanic who meticulously studied the technical specifications, recognized the margins for improvement, and deemed that preserving human lives was worth circumventing obscure regulations.